the significance of correlation coefficient. The significance of the correlation coefficient. As stated before, the range of the correlation coefficient is from -1 and +1. When the value of R is near to +1 or -1, then there is a strong linear relationship. When the value of R is near sa 0, the linear relationship is weak or non-existent. Since the value of R is computed from the data obtained from the samples, there are two possibilities when R is not equal to 0. Either the value of R is high enough to conclude that there is a significant linear relationship between the variables, or the value of R is due to chance. Ang question, unsaon na to pagkabalo kung due to chance nang siya, then we have to test ang ilahang significance, kumbaga. So to make this decision, you use the hypothesis testing procedure. The traditional method is similar to the one used in the previous chapter. So in testing hypothesis involving correlation coefficient, similar lang sa katong hypothesis testing involving population mean as well as involving population proportion. So ang first step is to state the hypothesis. Second is to find the critical values. Third is to compute the test value. Fourth is to make decision. And lastly is to summarize or conclude. Summarize the result or conclude. So, in testing, in hypothesis testing, one of these is true. Pag once ang atoang hypothesis testing involves population, correlation coefficient, then our null hypothesis will be rho equals to 0. In statement, this null hypothesis means that there is no correlation or no significant correlation between X and Y variables in the population. While our H sub A or H sub 1 ang gamit sa kaninga book, rho is not equals to 0. This is the alternative hypothesis. This means that there is a significant correlation between the variables in the population. So, usually, ang hypothesis na to, basta correlation coefficient. Though naay uban na ang gagamit atong greater than or less than, but kasagaran, not equal ang alternative na to. Basta correlation coefficient. So, wala na dili na kayo itong greater than or less than. So, that's the first step. Ang second step again is to determine the critical value. In solving for the critical value, kung sa population mean, so kung population mean ta, depende. Kung katuganing population is, standard deviation ba is known, o katong sample size, di ba? Depende kung sample size is greater than or equal to 30 or less than 30, katuman ang basihan, di ba? But sa population proportion pod, Z table atong ginagamit. Pero there is a correlation coefficient, ang T table pod atong gamiton. So recall tong critical value for T distribution. Katuganing na ay one-tailed, two-tailed, tapos na degree of freedom. So kato pod atong gamiton. So after mag-determine ang critical value, we will solve for the test statistic. For the formula for the t-test for the correlation coefficient, kani ang formula na to. T is equivalent to R times the square root of the quantity n minus 2 over 1 minus R squared. Ang R diri is katong correlation coefficient nga na-solve ninyo or ma-solve ninyo katuganin using the formula sa previous na tong lesson, while ang n is the sample size. And in determining the critical value, we will use the formula n minus 2 as for our degrees of freedom. So n minus 2 ang atong gamiton. Kung previously, we use n minus 1, sa correlation coefficient, we will use n minus 2 para sa degree of freedom. Again, n is the number of sample size. So let's have an example. So test the significance of the correlation coefficient found in example 10-4. Use alpha equals to 0.05 and R equals to 0.982. So sa kanina example, giskip na niya ang pag-solve sa R, given na ang R. Meaning, na-solve na kunuhay si R ba? Actually, this is the example, a data, kumbaga sa example 10-4. Natay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 companies, car companies. Kani is number of cars in 10,000s nga ilahang nabaligya. Meaning kaning 63 times 10,000. Mo nang number of cars nga nabaligya nila. Kaning si company B 29 times 10,000 mao nang number of cars nga nabaligya nila. And so on until company F 8.5 times 10,000. Mao tong number of cars nga nabaligya nila. While in revenue in billions, maapod ni ang ilahang kita. So si company A, nikita og $7 billion. Si company B is $3.9 billion and so on. Until F, $1.5 billion. So ang question dere karon ginatest is, naabay correlation between the number of cars na ilang nabaligya and then revenue. Nga sa ilang halin, kumbaga. So, based sa R nga na-solve, that's 0.982. Kung atong i-describe na 0.9, that is between 0.5 to positive 1. So, meaning, there is, ang ilang, kung i-describe natin ang correlation, strong ilang correlation. Meaning, strong ang relationship between the cars, number of cars sold, and ang revenue in billions. Strong. Ang question karon is i-test nato is significant ba tong correlation. So we will proceed to hypothesis testing. So ang first step is to state the null and alternative hypothesis. In symbol, that's rho equals to 0. Alternative is rho is not equals to 0. Meaning, sa null hypothesis, there is no significant correlation. Kay zero man ilang correlation. While ang alternative hypothesis, there is significant correlation between katong number of cars and revenue in billions. So, nga na ang hypothesis na to. So, second one is to find the critical value. Since alpha na to is 0.05, given naman to nga 0.05, then ang sample size na to is 6. 6 companies ba to from A to F. Then, to solve, to determine the degree of freedom, minus 2 ta. Minus 2 ni because we have 2 columns, 2 sets of data manggod. Cars tapos revenue. So, minus 2, we have 4. So, therefore, pangitao na to sa table ni alpha and alpha nga 0.05 nga two-tailed. Nga nung two-tailed again because ang atong alternative hypothesis is not equal to. Tapos degree of freedom na to is 4. So, yun sa pag-come up si positive negative 2.776. Using our table, degree of freedom is 4. Two-tailed ta nga 0.5. Ato ta kay 4, nara. Again, 4. Tapos two-tailed test at ta ka 0.5 tapos baba ta until kay 4. So that's 2.776. Since two-tailed siya, therefore positive and negative. So positive 2.776 morning boundary na to and negative 2.776. So to the right ani is the rejection region. To the left pod ani is also the rejection region. Between is the non-rejection region. So after ma-determine si critical value, we will now solve for the test value using the formula T is equivalent to R times the square root of the quantity n minus 2 all over the quantity n minus R squared. So since given na ito nga 0.982 ato ang correlation times the square root of 6 minus 2 this is actually our degree of freedom, over 1 minus 0.982 squared. So, pag solve ana, ang unahon nimo before ka mo come up aning 10.4, it should be 0.982 square root of 4 over 1 minus katong answer ato. So, preferably, again, round off ka sa last na lang. Then, until pagkahuman na to, sa calculator, kung gusto nimo kuan, 1 minus sa answer sa nimo ani, pagkahuman, 4 divided by sa answer ani, tapos square root nimo ang answer, then i-multiply nimo sa 0.982 until mo come up ka sa 10.4. And again, 3 decimal places na lang ta dire. So, after ma-solve, ma-compute ang test value, then we will now make a decision. So, ang 10.4, somewhere here na sa right ni positive 2.776. Therefore, since na-fall siya sa critical region, na-fall siya sa non-rejection, sa rejection region, therefore, we can reject the null hypothesis. So, that will be our decision, reject the null hypothesis. And finally, we now summarize the result and conclude that there is a significant relation between the number of cars a rental agency owns and its annual income. So, So, again, basic one is nag-reject siya. So, therefore, there is sufficient evidence. Reject na null hypothesis man. So, therefore, there is a sufficient evidence to reject the claim, and ang conclusion na to nga there is significant relationship na. Kay ang atong claim actually mahulog man is there is no significant relationship. So i-reject to nimo, so therefore you can say that there is a significant relationship between the two variables. So in ato lang mag test of hypothesis involving correlation coefficient. So that's all actually about the significance of correlation coefficient. Thank you and see you next session.